So I've been having a look at... Oh, yeah. It's the problem where you don't brush your hair in the morning. So yeah, I've been having a look at old articles, really old articles, and I came upon this. This was done by Mike Galsworthy back on the 18th of February 2014. So this was even before the referendum was a thing, even before the 2015 general election. So he wrote this, and the title of the article, I'll leave a link to it down below as well, is Eurosceptics Could Damage British Science and Innovation. In the debate about Britain's membership of the EU, we shouldn't forget science. Here, Mike Galsworthy argues that the Europe offers clear benefits for science and innovation. So, here we go. So, the EU's academic output is 20% higher than the US. This shouldn't really be a surprise given that the EU's combined population of over 500 million versus America's 300 million. In fact, Europe produces a third of the world's research outputs, and like China, investment is being ramped up while the UK and US investments are treading water. It is widely known in British science and industry that the EU's now impressive engine is providing a boon for UK research and innovation. The bureaucracy is being stripped away and being replaced with a can-do attitude. Yet our current government is hardly communicating this to the British people. See, this is one of the things I've constantly talked about, that and it's not even just here, it's all like the anti-Eurosceptics are always in the same thing. They nationalise success and Europeanise failure, and this is exactly the point here. So that they can have that they cannot even told our small businesses that billions of euros in competitive funds are now available from the EU for them to collaborate with universities and develop marketable products. So the government would not even tell small businesses that are developing things like that, saying, hey, there's all this money available for you to go to universities, develop your products, and take it to market. That is now gone. So remember, this was written back in 2014. This is now gone because we're leaving the EU. The Conservatives have been accused of burying behind a flood of news and government documents showing a strong positive impact of the EU on British science and businesses. It's exactly the same as it always has been. What have the government recently been in trouble for? Oh yes, that's right, hiding documents showing how good we were in the EU versus now what happens when we're going to leave and the negative effects of that. So where were we? Yes. Last month, a Conservative think tank bizarrely accused the EU of being anti-science. Add this to the anti-immigration noises that scientists have long warned is damaging, and the result is that Eurosceptics are compromising critical UK innovation opportunities. What do we get from the EU? The UK contributes some 11.5% to the overall EU budget, and we win some 16% of the competitively awarded science funding. In health, we lead 20% of all projects. Mobility grants from the EU bring some of the brightest minds from the mainland to our shores, and the EU's large international project allows our researchers to network widely and lead up big science. Membership of the European Space Agency has been a shot in the arm for UK space research. The World Wide Web was invented by a British scientist at Europe's CSEN facility. where the Higgs boson, named after another British scientist, was recently discovered. The UK nuclear fission project is now overshadowed by the EU-led 13 billion nuclear fission project, which is co-funded by the United States and China amongst others. On the new wonder material, graphene, the UK is investing around 50 million, while the EU is spending a cool billion euros. Going it alone is unwise compared to taking up a freely offered leadership position on the world's top science initiatives. Even the chief scientific advisor to Borisov is our own Anne Glover, and some of the most exciting innovation policy thinking is coming from the EU-UK interface. Added to this, the EU has increased scientific funding by 30% to make a seven-year, 800 billion, that's 65 billion in pounds, science programme called Horizon 2020. Compared this to the UK's government annual science budget increase from 4.6 billion to 4.7 billion. Following a year where investment stagnated, the biggest increase in science investment comes from the EU. And what's going to happen now once we leave the EU? We're going to fall behind massively. But you don't hear, here's the other thing, you do not hear people like Rees-Mogg talk about this. And I point this out, point all the time, that he doesn't talk about a lot of the stuff we are going to be losing. We are going to fall behind massively in innovation. But if you ever talked about him increasing, the science budget that the UK can give, to help improve science and innovation? Never do. Well, I've never heard of him, but I'd be interested to see if he has. Yes, Europe's resurgence on the science playing field has not been lost on our US colleagues. On July 4th, 2012, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the popular American astrophysicist, was retweeted 11,435 times with on the day we reserve to tell ourselves America is great, July 4th, Europe reminds us we are stuck at science. Hashtag Higgs boson. Early in the year, Tyson gave a lecture showing how the US was losing out to Western Europe and Asia in science growth. The European science brand is taking off, and we're in the pilot seats, and the Eurosceptic voices are trying to block us. Some of this blocking behaviour happens more subtly. If you go to the Department for Business and Innovation and Skills, you simply wouldn't know that the EU has ring-fenced some 25% of the Horizon 2020 budget for a small innovative businesses across Europe. Even if you find the Europe link, you're told only that the IBS is working to reform the EU to make it more open and competitive. How about they reform themselves to be more open about the 15 billion of competitive EU funds available to UK businesses? This is deliberate neglect, is a serious derisive. In fact, in a few weeks back, the BIS standardly communicated that the balance of competences report on the UK-EU would be released at the end of 2014. Then the floods came, and the documents, which were hugely in favour of the EU, were sneaked out without fanfare. This was despite a Downing Street memo told to hold off any non-urgent announcement until after the floods. Adding insult to injury, in an article in the Financial Times online last month, described a think tank of mainstream Tories MPs who claim that the EU has institutionalised prejudice against science. The arguments are painful, and I will detail this more on the Science and the Scientists for Labour blog. For now, it is suffice to say that the EU has done much to bolster British science. Maybe it is time to offer vocal support back. We're helping our own future in the process. So that was incredibly, it's incredibly frustrating, because now we've lost all that funding we had, all that stuff that's being put in. The 13 billion into the EU-led nuclear fission project. We don't get to take part in that anymore, because we're not members of the EU. We don't get to talk about, the new wonder material, graphene, where the UK has just invested, 50 million into it. The EU's put $1 billion into it. This is what, I've said for a while, and it's proved here. The government does this all the time. Any time where there were, again, remember, this was written back in 2014. So I'll just go over that again. They communicated that the balance of competencies report in the UK EU would be released by the end of 2014, and then we had the big floods, and that's when that came out when the documents, which were hugely in favour of the EU, were sneaked out without fanfare. None of all these, the government has hundreds of documents saying how good the EU is for us, but as I've said before, we've nationalised success and Europeanised failure when that has not been the case. We have failed to sing our, successes where we've done really well in lots of areas, and where the EU has come in and helped us. For example, when he makes the case of, look, there's this huge amount of ring-fence money that a government department can hand out to you, but it doesn't even advertise that fact, that it's available to these small businesses. But it doesn't matter now, because we're gone, we're leaving the EU, no more money for those businesses. So if your business could have, profited and been a boon to your small business from it, well, you don't get it now. And you think the government's going to offer you this money? No. Farmers are still holding out that they might get a rebate, which they currently get from the EU. The government has said nothing about that. They've just said, oh, well, you might get something. That's now 80% of all small farms in the UK now are shutting down without that money. And now what's going to happen? We're going to fall behind. The Tory think tank that says, oh, the EU is prejudiced against science, the Tory government isn't going to invest in science. If anything, it'll probably get cut. And we'll just fall behind, and what will happen is all the bright and intelligent people in the UK will leave. Even if they were born here and are UK citizens, they will go and seek citizenship in an EU country, because that's where all the action will be. And that will be one of the consequences of Brexit, that the UK will fall behind the EU in science and development and innovation. And the problem will be that Eurosceptics lied through their teeth, like they always have done for years, even now, that it was the EU is bad. It's prejudice against science. prejudice against science. Look at all the numbers we just read out, and in 2014 about how much they were spending in science innovation. Again, we've lost all that money now. You know, I keep on saying to Brexiteers, how are you going to replace all that money? How are you going to replace all that investment? Now, a lot of them, I guarantee, is going to be so, oh, we'll just get it from other countries. That doesn't just happen overnight. And that level of cooperation that we had with the EU is not going to just, you know, be reinvented overnight with another country. There were hundreds of different things that the EU gave us in advantages to be able to do that cooperation incredibly well and successfully. But we can't now. So that's just another thing that we've lost through Brexit.